It's a lovely, bright, sunny day here in Harare, and I'm at the usual place. It looks like the producer has left the patient in charge of the asylum again, and Tinashe is away. So, in his place, we actually have somebody much more interesting, much more knowledgeable about what they're talking about. They not only identify as an economist, they have a PhD in economics. Our good friend Alfred, who's also a teetotaler and likes to look dapper, just like Tinashe. Thank you so much for making the time to be with us today. I think until sometime earlier this morning, we weren't even sure whether we were going to record at all. So we're delighted to be able to have you. I think we had a debate last night about some issues, and then I threw down the gauntlet, and and you were brave enough to accept the invite. So thank you so much for coming through. And as you might be aware, we usually start with the boring corner of the bar with the teetotalers. What are you having this hot sunny afternoon?
Yeah, thanks, Roof. Suppose water. And there's quite a lot of ice here. So it's hot.
Yeah. It's quite hot these days.
Yeah. So,
And
this is one of the best brands that the country has ever produced.
yeah, and it's very popular, and understand it's got quite there's quite a lot of people in the diaspora who consume it as well. So in South Africa and in the UK, it's done incredibly well. And as always, on the more interesting side of the table, I have a bottle of Dalwini. It combines the two favorite flavors that I like, sweetness and smokiness. So it's really quite sad that you won't be joining me in this. But I will keep some for my friend George when he comes to Harare for the festive season. So
Indulge. We'll indulge this side with our mazoe as well.
So let's start with a macroeconomic perspective. How do you see things in terms of the performance of the Zimbabwean economy? Just last week, Delta reported their numbers, and they reported $1 numbers.
Yes, they do.
Which I found quite strange, because for the 6 months they report for the full year last time they reported US dollar numbers. This time around they've reported $1 numbers, but we were still able to make some sense of what they were announcing, because they told us what they were doing in terms of volumes, and we are doing record hectoliters of lager beer production and consumption in this country. So from a macroeconomic perspective, how do you see that? Does that tell us that our economy is doing well, that we're growing because we're able to consume more beer?
So in the case of Delta particularly, what we should perhaps be looking at closely is the type of products that they have in their basket, and what a surge in volume sales means about the product. So on without sounding like a PhD that you say that I am, but there's this thing that they call the price elasticity, right?
Yep.
So how responsive is the product to change in income and so on in the economy? So that's the first thing that we should look at in the case of Delta. Are the volumes that we're seeing going up a sign that we're doing well? Our household incomes are improving. But then there's these type of goods where we can see increase in demand even when household incomes are not really going up. Sometimes you can even see increase in volumes when household incomes are going down. Sometimes we have to, I'm told some people drink them, you can drink yourself out of misery.
Yes, I think so. I think Gift
So-
was on the show a few weeks ago, and he actually made that case that maybe the increase in lager beer volumes is a function of people just being more stressed and needing to
Absolutely.
numb the pain more with. But then I'll push back against that argument and say, Well, okay, that might explain away what's happening with lager beer volumes. But if carbonated soft drink volumes are also at record highs, and people don't get numb from drinking soft drinks, what explains that growth? What explains that demand?
So I think to look at that sector or that beverages sector in isolation of others and just say, look, because we are seeing volume demand in these beverages, it means that household incomes are going up. What are we seeing about the sale of what are we seeing about the payment patterns of rentals, for instance? Are we seeing more defaults? Are we seeing? So we gotta look at it from a much more higher level than just looking at
Just beverages, okay.
Because at the end of the day, if you look at that whole, whether it's beverages or your core products in OK, and you are seeing the demand there is basically stable. And if I can't afford to buy a large, I don't know, 60-screen TV or whatever it is, but I can afford to buy a Coke or a beer every other time, so be it. So what are we seeing in the demand of those other high-end products, and what does that mean about the economy? So when we have that holistic look of things, then we can say, okay, the economy is pumping or the economy is in a standstill. But in the case of what we're seeing from Delta results is just strong demand of those of
those. Yeah, and I think the other aspect of the Delta numbers that's interesting is this. 10 years ago, 15 years ago, certainly in the carbonated soft drink space, there was nothing other than Delta products. Now you have Varun and Pepsi and they seem to be moving meaningful volumes. And then you have Fizzy, which is another local alternative to the Coca-Cola brands that didn't exist 10, 15 years ago. That's also moving meaningful volumes. So the market has certainly grown. But I take your point.
And also, Roof, how if you flash back 10, 15 years ago, how we used to buy a Coke or a Pepsi is a bit different. Now I walk down the street, every other corner I can buy a soft drink or I can
absolutely. So they're much more accessible.
Absolutely. So that will have a natural tendency of I can
improving volumes.
Yes, I can just get a drink.
Okay, and so staying in that demand. Space. Simbisa also they didn't report numbers. They had an AGM and they released some figures about how they were performing in the first quarter of this year, and their volumes are also growing. And again, these are your chicken ins, pizza ins, that sort of thing. This speaks to aggregate consumer demand. And the other thing that I found interesting from their release was that for their Zimbabwe business, 85% of their revenue is US dollars. And 15%
is local.
Is local currency. And it's an update because the last official number we had was from Zimstats, a few months ago, and they indicated that 76% of the economy was US dollars and the balance was Zim dollars. So it looks like the Zim dollar is continuing to lose market share. What's your view 6-12 months from now? Is it going to still be here? The Zim dollar.
Did you ask me that question last time?
Yeah. But we've got
answered that question.
But we've got new information.
No.
We've got new information. We've got
the information hasn't changed. It's still the same. So except for one thing, what has really changed is the pronouncement that when we spoke last time, I think
it was unclear whether we're going to have monocurrency after 2025, and then now we have the statutory instrument that says we're going to have multi-currency until
that the multi-currency regime will run. Right?
Yes, although a senior treasury official, I think it was the deputy minister, just this week also indicated that they have not abandoned monocurrency. So
no. But those two are not. No, I think
they're not mutually exclusive.
No, yeah, I think I read some of the comments, and I think I was talking to colleagues this morning. I think sometimes we read what we hear what we want to hear, or read what we want to hear. The multi-currency is running to, for now, 2030.
Yeah. So for the next 7 years,
shorter,
at least.
It could be shorter.
Yeah.
It could be shorter depending. But the policy has always been clear
That
at
we want
least
to go
to
to a
my
monocurrency.
reading of it,
Yeah.
it's been clear for past 6-7 years that the
We're
country-
going to have a local currency.
absolutely. So that clarity is always there, and the multi-currency is there not as a substitute of, not to mean that we're abandoning the monocurrency. I don't think that has ever been the case, except that it's what people sometimes read into. So when the pronouncement is when the pronouncement is, look guys, a roadmap is coming out for monocurrency, it doesn't say anything that we're pushing away
The multi-currency. So maybe, okay, I'm going to be very charitable and generous and assume that the kind of language that we heard before 2017 about, or before the reintroduction of the local currency, that there needs to be stability, there needs to be reserves, there need to be certain things in place for us to have a Zim dollar again. Obviously,
not again, Roof.
yeah. So
it's there.
yeah. So it's there, but for it to be a monocurrency, so maybe the vision is it becomes a monocurrency from 2030 and beyond, or if we make faster progress, it's something that we can seriously consider before 2030. But if we actually have these building blocks or reservoirs of faith and confidence in terms of foreign currency reserves, in terms of maybe gold reserves, in terms of other sources of assurance that this version of the modern currency is actually going to work significantly better than what we've seen over the last 5-10 years. Yeah, so it'll be interesting to see that roadmap and the milestones along the way that are going to take us. But should we be talking about it without those milestones, without the roadmap? So soon after announcing that multi-currency is going to be here until 2030.
So soon is not actually proper for you to say, because as I said,
that's always been the policy.
That's always been the policy. I think it's as I said, people it's just reading what we want to hear from it. What was your question?
Is it appropriate to be talking about it so soon? So yeah. So I think you've answered that. So yeah, we await the details. They say the devil is in the details. So it'll be quite interesting to see. The details when they do come out. But yeah, so far 86, 85. Well, as far as Simbisa's experience is 85% USD, 15%. My take is that the Zim dollar is going to continue to lose market share. And it's got quite an uphill task to come back as a monocurrency.
So in my view, what seems to be clear, at least this time around, because this is the second round in which the local currency is under threat, so to speak, after 2008 or whatever it is. What is different now, I think, is an alertness and an awareness and perhaps a resolve from policy that it must not disappear as it did last time. Okay, so it may shrink, as you rightly say, in market share, as long as it lingers. Okay, that is fine. It's a question now again of how are we restoring, or how is confidence being restored as it shrinks and gaining back that market share.
Yeah.
So being defensive enough, whatever that roadmap is that we're waiting to see, to ensure that what happened then doesn't happen again. Because if it happens again, then it means that we are losing another maybe 15 years and this cycle will play again. So
15 years?
Yes, the currency cannot go away. It can lose, 15, if you're saying it's 15% now, fine, maybe another 10 and then grow back again, as long as it doesn't disappear. And I think that is the difference between now and then. That clarity that the currency must stay.
Yeah, I think the clarity. I don't know whether you're being generous when you use the word clarity. Sometimes I
No,
feel.
no. I prefer to read policy as is, okay, and analyze it as is, okay, rather than read into what is there. I think,
Yeah, yeah. No, no,
And
because
rather than read what I want to see in it.
no, for sure, for sure.
So that's why I talk a lot about, like, as a researcher, is about being disinterested in something. Just look at the issue. What is the policy saying? Not what do I want to see in it, and just analyze it from that perspective. And perhaps at a certain point subordinate what I want to see to just analyzing the policy. And there is clarity on that policy that we're going monocurrency in Zim, and that this currency, unlike last time, must not disappear. I think there is clarity there.
Okay, I think that's the intention. I think that's the aspiration. I think. Do you have an opinion though, in terms of
In terms of what?
in terms of the probability that they will succeed in actually
As a country,
preserving?
I don't think we've got a choice except to have a local currency. We don't have a choice. I mean, we can play around games and say we want this dollarization, and you're gonna see, and we're seeing it already. As the more we dollarize,
Yeah.
the more we're going to squeal as consumers. The more the cost structure of companies, the producers, is going to be. It's already is difficult. So it may sound like there is stability, yes, but we are squealing. We will squeal. And as I said last time, how do we boost demand with a currency that we have no control over?
Well, it's a good question. If you look at the Rand monetary union, you've got countries like Botswana, where the pula is pegged to the Rand, and you've got Namibia and Lesotho. They seem to do quite fine outsourcing their monetary policy to the South Africans. Why can't we do fine outsourcing our monetary policy to the Fed?
Fair, fine. I'm all for it. AU is all for a monetary union.
Yeah.
First in
and I think the East Africans also have. They also
absolutely, that's AU policy. Agenda 20, very clear. Again, policy is always clear. Very clear on that. But we can't rock into SADC with the US dollar, can we? We need our own currency. Then we can go into SADC. We've got our own currency. Then whatever we call it, then we're a union. Then we graduate into the AU agenda as planned.
Okay.
Behind schedule, of course.
No. No. I think the AU's behind schedule on everything. So it remains to be seen whether we make any progress on that front. So maybe just.
But the policymaker, of course, is a big task, because the general impression or the general feeling is stability equals use of US dollar. Okay.
That's the perception.
That's the perception. So it is incumbent on the policymaker or those that seem to understand to demonstrate that actually is the other way around.
Yeah. So let's zoom out a little bit in terms of the specifics of the currency that we've been discussing, and just talk about the role of government in economics in general, and bring us closer to the debate we were having yesterday. Yes, that one. Yeah. Philosophically, where do you sit in terms of there's a spectrum. Obviously, you're not a fan of communism or socialism.
I find it difficult to categorize anything. So I prefer. I know it's like I'm running away from your question, but to put you in that box, that roof belongs to that box, is very difficult.
Because I'm easy. I'm a ardent free market capitalist.
What does that mean?
So, I believe that the government's role is to be the referee, and the markets should basically be the players. And the government has no business being a player in the market. So, your government should be as small as possible, and it should be engaged in setting the rules and regulations and enforcing them. So that's where I stand.
So you basically believe in utopia, like sugar candy mountains, Molly, kind of.
Well, it's not utopia. Look, I think so. The real world will never be utopia.
Yes.
Because the real world is populated by human beings, and we are fallible, and so there will never be a utopia. But we do, there are things that we figured out, right? I think we've run, as human beings, this experiment with socialism and communism. And the results have been in for some time. The Soviet Union experiment, China under Mao. If you look at modern day Cuba, if you look at North Korea, I think we can agree without controversy that those systems did not produce the promised outcomes.
Yeah, but then again, those systems also existing in a time of a Cold War, and so you are not just looking at a pure economic system. You are also looking at a war being waged by either party, and when one party emerges as a winner, and were schooled in that kind of lens, which
which I'm
judging from the books that you read,
yes.
So you will always be very certain
That
the other system is a failure.
Yeah, but
that communism or whatever it's called is a failure without actually factoring in. And I'm not saying it's a success or a failure.
Yeah.
But without factoring in that this is all happening in the course of a warfare.
Okay,
so just looking at economic systems in a jar without any.
Yes, you can't. The nature of social sciences is you can't have double blind, controlled experiments. You like you can in chemistry and physics. But I actually like that you are talking about socialism and communism having to actually operate in an environment in that Cold War environment. Yeah. Because many thinkers have made the case that whether or not you win a war, fundamentally it's about whether your economics are better than the other side. Because your capacity to sustain a certain military posture is a function of how well your economy is doing. So certainly during the Cold War, you had the communist bloc, which was competing with the West, which was a capitalist bloc. And so doesn't the outcome of that Cold War, in which the West came out on top, doesn't that tell us that their economic system is better because it actually won the Cold War?
I think it's bigger than the categorizations that we give these things, socialism, communism, whatever. For me, I think it's just pragmatism.
Mm-hmm.
Given all these unknowns that are before me, what is the best way of arranging my affairs to emerge with the best outcome?
Agreed.
So that's why for me, the categorization, it kind of stifles the mind, and then we end up fighting when we're not supposed to be fighting. So I believe in pragmatism, the kind of economists that I think are in that line of thought. That's why I talk of the global south economists, and you love it.
What is the global south?
I'm sure you've read the works of people like Ricardo Haussmann, guys like Danny Roderick, guys like
so maybe just
those are the kind. That's the kind of pragmatism that I'm talking about. That the important thing is to understand your context,
mm-hmm.
and the limitations that you have. So, and you play around those limitations to find the best way out. Communism, socialism, or the communalism that our ancestors practiced in excellence and did very well in Africa. All those.
Did we do so well?
Yeah, we did very well until
because we woke up one day and we were colonized. So relatively speaking, we weren't doing so well.
Yeah, we're a kind.
but
we're a trusted people.
But I want to push back, and I'll give you. I think the closest thing that we have to a perfect experiment in economics on the planet is the dichotomy between North Korea and South Korea. right?
Yes,
It's the
yes.
same people
I knew you were
ethnically,
going to come there.
right? It's the same people ethnically. They are on the same part of the world, so the geography is the same, right? It's an arbitrary line that demarcates them, right? And we had this experiment since the end of the Korean War. I think it ended in 1953. They were both in a mess, after years of war. One went the path of capitalism, the other went the path of communism. And look at them now. It's just chalk and cheese. The North is impoverished. They've got third world per capita income and life outcomes. And the South is a developed country, first world, great life outcomes. So how would you actually pass that and say it doesn't tell us that one system, capitalism, is better than the other, communism?
Yeah, it's again, it's understanding the context of those countries, and it's much more complex than that. One decided to do communism and the other decided to do.
What are the other factors?
Where was the capital? How did the other party industrialize that rapidly? And
they were able because
they were able.
They were able to.
There was need of capital.
Yes, so capital. Where did the capital come from? If you have a free market, then capital is going to go to a place where it will get a return. It was able to go to South Korea. It was not able to go to North Korea. So, and that's a function of the system, right? If you have a system in which you're allowed to own property, you're allowed free enterprise, you're allowed to make profits and remit dividends, then you will attract capital. If you have a system where those things are not allowed, who's going to give you capital?
No, fair enough. I can't argue there. But as I said, it's not about this. It's about understanding the the constraints that the Northerners there have.
But were they not self-imposed though? So
as pragmatists, all we want to understand is to make sure that we understand the context very well.
Okay, so if you're thinking about it
in that context, then just craft what works.
Exactly. So I also like to look at things pragmatically. I'm not an ideologue.
Yes.
And so if you are to look at it from a Zimbabwean perspective and say, okay, fine, if you had a blank piece of paper and you wanted to take us forward, right? And you've got all these case studies. You've got North Korea, South Korea, you've got the Soviet Union, Western Europe, and the US. You've got all these examples with different outcomes to learn from, so that we can take advantage of what worked and avoid.
Didn't work.
What do you think would make the most sense for Zimbabwe?
You know what I'll do? Not what I will do. What I do is I avoid looking at a picture, just a picture of North Korea, because North Korea is one. So you gotta look at the world globally. There is your economic history.
Yep.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So you have to look at the journey of a nation. So if you are looking at the US or the Europe and the what and that, and then you learn from a longer path than just cherry picking and saying, okay, let's look at South versus North Korea. Mm-hmm. And then let's see what we can learn. And that is prevalent a lot nowadays.
Okay.
But let's look at the journey that this country has gone through, the blips, the ups and downs, and from that journey of, be it Singapore, be it Malaysia, be it Estonia, or whatever it is. Mm-hmm. And there's a pool of analysts doing that. What then can we learn from all these other institutions other than just
but so if
one
you
or two?
We can go all over the world. We can go 100 years ago, 200 years ago,
and that's the
and I think that the history is very clear that communism doesn't work, that capitalism works. I think the data, for the most part, that's what it's telling us.
Those communism, those terms are recent terms. Those are terms of the 19th, 20th century. If I like going back to the US. If you look at when they won their independence in 1789 from the Brits, and the cabinet was small. I think they had 4 with Washington at the top. and Hamilton writes the industrial development policy, much against the narrative that we hear that this whole free market government must stand alone. It was very active. It was actually all out to try to build industrial cities. Okay, it didn't quite work.
Yes, Hamilton was a.
It didn't quite work at that time, but so when he died, and all the way up to the Civil War, it looked like all those experiences were a flop. But when you look at things that happened later, it was like they were building on what he was initially doing. That is the state being actively involved in the development of private enterprise. But when you read and you hear the narrative today of the Washington consensus that you are talking about, is the government must stay away from things.
Yes.
And just be the so-called referee without playing a role.
But are you familiar? Okay, if we're gonna just linger on the US for a little bit with the argument about the men who built America, the so-called robber barons, right?
Yes,
so
yes.
before roads became a thing, the railways were built by the
Vanderbilts and
the Vanderbilts of this world. The infrastructure that facilitated large-scale consumption of oil, Standard Oil. That's John D. Rockefeller. Steel. Andrew Carnegie. These are the men who built America. It was not a bureaucrat sitting somewhere in Washington, D.C. saying, right, we need railway from this place to that place. We need steel mills there. We need this infrastructure to distribute oil. It was entrepreneurs.
Yeah, I'm a pragmatist. You look at the context and you make sure you understand the context first thoroughly. They were doing that because what we define as government today, the structures that were there, that was a nascent government. Those guys were operating, for instance, without a civil service, so to speak. Okay, it was not quite there yet. Okay, they didn't even have a central bank. Okay.
Yeah, they did very well without a central bank.
Some bankers were doubling as central bankers.
The banks for the longest time were issuing their own notes, their own currencies,
and they were
and some would fail, some would succeed. Yes. But it's a free market. It's a beautiful thing, don't you think?
Making their own rules, right?
Yes. And then you, the customer, choose who you want to deal with. You have freedom. Not the system where you have a state monopoly and they have the privilege and power to print and dilute your savings whenever it suits them. This is why
So then in your utopic world, it seems to me, having had this conversation on the US, you will actually not just like government to be the referee. You'll actually like it not to be there. And
but look,
enterprise.
No, I don't think you'll have anarchy. So philosophically, I'm on the libertarian side, and in our camp, on the far right, you have the anarchists, people who believe that there shouldn't be a government, that the market can even sort out governance amongst participants. And I don't think that can work. I'm in the small government camp. So I believe government is indispensable to the functioning of a state, but I believe that it works best when it's small and it focuses on setting the rules and enforcing them. This idea that, you've got all these, and this is not just a Zimbabwean phenomenon. I mean, all across the world, you've got governments dabbling in public health and education and utilities and, and wherever these government operations operate adjacent to private sector competitors, the private sector is always much better run. Always doing better everywhere in the world. So, to me, that tells me that.
So I guess you the book that I recommended doesn't.
Yeah, entrepreneurial states. I mean, what does that even mean? How can a state be entrepreneurial? Because what defines an entrepreneur is the fact that firstly, they own the company. They've got skin in the game, right? Or they founded the company.
What defines entrepreneurship is willingness and capacity to take risk.
Yes,
Okay?
but the difference between a real entrepreneur and this mythological state entrepreneur is that if I'm an entrepreneur and I fail, right, I actually lose my capital.
Yes.
Right. But if I'm sitting somewhere in a government office and I'm running an experiment, an entrepreneurial experiment, and that fails miserably, right? As long as I win re-election, I can carry on.
No. You are mixing things, Ruf. You are mixing government and politics.
Okay.
Those are different things. I'm talking government here.
Yeah.
As an entrepreneur.
Okay.
Not the politician.
Sure.
Or not the political party, but the institution of government. We the people. So we've got some of our money, we the people, in national treasury. Okay.
Yes, that's true, for sure.
Okay, it's managed there. And we're saying, okay, we're seeing things going this way, or want to drive our society that direction.
Okay.
We've got the resources. It's our money. Okay. So we'll set up, if you are the Americans, you will set up NASA. You are using X, you have a phone there. So what's that?
Yeah. An iPhone, yeah.
Without you, the people, chances are you will only have that phone. Okay. Because all that technology is based on with the people's funding, right?
Not all of it. Maybe
So
maybe
this
some
is
of
what
it.
I'm saying about government.
Yeah.
Being entrepreneurial, whether it's through military expenditure or whatever to do research in certain technologies, whether it's our industrial research board in Zim doing research in this funded by the fiscus, okay? Then where you guys come in, which I was saying yesterday on X, is where you guys come in with your biographies of celebrity entrepreneurs is then you take things at that level where this entrepreneur comes up with the infrastructure, with the industrial infrastructure set up by NASA and the industrial board, research board of Zimbabwe has been set up. Then Alfred comes along, exploits that technology, and becomes a rock star. But the infrastructure, that risk was taken by the state.
Yeah. Okay. Fine. The state did take risk, but the state was
and across the river. I think they use a lot. The South Africans like calling it the development state. Is it developmental state?
Yeah, developmental state.
Yes.
Yeah.
Where, and that's partly the pragmatism that I'm talking about. It's either developmental state, or you are looking at your DFIs taking an active role in seeding the growth of private enterprise, because some of the capital is shy to take on some risks. Yeah, but the people, because we know our grandchildren are coming along, we can take that risk using the national treasure.
Yeah.
So that's where the entrepreneurial state comes in.
So I'm going to push back a little bit. And yes, I think that a lot of technology, a lot of scientific understanding and breakthroughs were funded and driven by the state. But in the examples that you cite, it's not because the state was being entrepreneurial. The state was actually in an existential competition. So, for example, if you think about the information age, then the computer and all of the technology that developed subsequent to the initial computer, right? The Manhattan Project is when they first built big computers to do the mathematics and physics around how do you make an atomic bomb. And so they weren't being entrepreneurial. They understood that if the Nazis developed the bomb first, they're done. The Nazis will take over the world, right?
And some of them, those physicists were actually from?
Yeah, they fled. Your Einstein, your Enrico Fermi, they were actually Germans. They were Jewish, and they fled, right? So it's not like they were being entrepreneurial. They were actually under immense pressure. And if you look at the other big leap forward, which you alluded to, which is NASA, the Apollo project. I think they employed 400,000 engineers. They spent a huge amount of money because the Soviets had just launched Sputnik, and the Americans went into a panic and said, "No, look, we need to win this race, right?" And they put all these resources, and they drove this Apollo project to be the first to put a man on the moon. right?
But you realize you are describing a
But that's
competition there.
yes, that's a competition, but that's not entrepreneurship. That is
That's entrepreneurship.
that
though.
is state versus state competition, and it was not driven by altruism or by being entrepreneurial. It was driven by existential dread that if those guys get there first, we're done. But and maybe that's where states can be really effective when their existence is threatened, right?
Yeah.
But for the most part, the entrepreneur who's just looking to make money for himself or herself, they will be much more efficient and effective than the state.
Okay. I don't know the context. I'm reading around it. The Middle East is an area that I'm trying to educate myself around.
Yeah.
But aren't you seeing an entrepreneurial state there in some of the states like the UAEs, the Qatars, and so on? The Doha. Aren't you seeing the state being entrepreneurial there?
Yeah, look, I think certainly, the Dubai story is inspiring. It's phenomenal what they've done with the place. I mean, if you look at pictures of that place in the 1970s,
Saudi Arabia,
and you look at what they've done in the decades since, it's phenomenal. It's impressive. But you see, there's always a counterfactual that people don't talk about when they talk about these success stories that are state driven, like Dubai, which is if because to be fair, they had like in the case of Dubai, they had all this oil money that funded that initial vision, right? And it was to his credit, the leadership executed fantastically well, right? But if it was actually left to a free market, right, what would the outcome have been, right?
I hear you.
Could it not be even more phenomenal? We don't know. We'll never know. Right?
We'll never know. But my point, you get my point, that you've got quite a...
And for every example of a Dubai, which has done incredibly well,
Yes.
there's an example of some banana republic somewhere.
But
or a state that has failed miserably, like Venezuela, where, you've had a guy in charge who doesn't have a great vision, who isn't able to execute. And in spite of the fact that Venezuela has the largest proven oil reserves on the planet, it's one of the poorest countries on earth. So you can hit and miss.
It's like entrepreneurship. So the entrepreneur can be an individual, the entrepreneur can be the state. And here what we are seeing, like you are describing the some of the countries in the so-called Middle East that they've done well, led by the state. I understand that's the kind of model that the China is driven largely by the state or state entities, is doing very well. The US itself, where the entrepreneurs that are overly celebrated are building on the technologies and the research
Overly celebrated
of the state.
Yeah.
And what her argument in that book is we are not saying I think I shared it on X.
Yeah.
We are not saying the entrepreneur, whether it's Steve Jobs or
Bill Gates
Bill Gates.
or
We're not saying they
Zuckerberg or
didn't
whoever
do
it is.
well. No,
Yeah.
they did a great job.
So you don't agree with Obama in his speech where he says, you didn't build that?
But we can't pretend that the state didn't risk capital. And so the argument in that book really is, okay, let's acknowledge that the state has done this. And perhaps let's think of a model in which we, the people who funded these things, can get a dividend, just like Rufaro is getting a dividend from Apple. Somehow, let us share in the upside. Because right now we build all this infrastructure as a people.
Yeah.
But the glory and the profits goes to the entrepreneur. So we want a cut of that.
Yeah, well, so you've already got a cut of that. I'll tell you that for nothing.
Taxes.
So a book that you should read.
Which one?
It's called The Capitalist Manifesto. I can't remember offhand the name of the author. I can actually look it up in my library. But he makes the case, and this is not just his opinion. He actually backs it up with a model and data to say, look, if you look at these so-called overly celebrated entrepreneurs, somebody like Jeff Bezos at Amazon, right? He's worth more than $100 billion US. But if you actually look at the value that he's created, so the other shareholders in Amazon, all the people who are employed there in the US alone, they employ 1.4 million people, and all the downstream economic growth associated with the existence of Amazon, the suppliers into Amazon, everybody who's benefited from Amazon existing. If you actually measure how much value was created, you'll find that Jeff Bezos is only participating in less than 3% of that value. Everybody else is participating, is doing much, the value spread amongst others significantly. So there's a way to also think about it without actually trying to measure how much value in total has been created. So if you think about things that we use every day for free, like X, if you're not a premium user of X, or WhatsApp, yes. Right? So WhatsApp is, it's a fantastic story of entrepreneurship. The guy who founded it is an immigrant. He built this thing from scratch. By the time he sold it to Facebook, it only had 55 employees. And I think he got a check for, the whole thing was valued at 2.2 billion. But think about the world we live in today, where because of something like WhatsApp, you can have a conversation with somebody in Australia or Brazil or UK, and it's free. What, how do you value that benefit? Right? To literally billions of people, right? Jan Koen, the founder of WhatsApp, probably his net worth is $1 billion or $1.5 billion or whatever it is, right? But he's benefited billions of people, right? So I don't.
Yeah, absolutely. Those are fantastic positive externalities of the infrastructure that the state put in place, and it's okay.
So I think we don't celebrate the entrepreneur enough. I think people are fixated on the fact that these guys are billionaires and they're so much richer than everybody else, and they forget about the enduring contribution to society. And the other thing that we is
in some of the social activities that they
do, and personal wealth, is ephemeral, right? We're all going to die. Okay, this is there's the I don't know. I don't remember who said this, but yeah, there's the two things that are certain in life is death and taxes, right? So, and in most parts of the world, there are estate taxes. So even if you are able to preserve your wealth and pass it on to your children, 3-4 generations down the line, it will have been chowed by estate taxes. So the state actually claws back all the wealth created by entrepreneurs in the long term. In fact, people who've been tracking this have shown that by the third generation, 90% of the wealth has gone.
Okay, if it's being regenerated.
Yes.
Okay.
You see? So it's a temporary upside for the overly celebrated
so it's
entrepreneur.
Game.
The state actually claws back every last dollar of new wealth created by entrepreneurs in the long term. If it's still there, as long as the state is still there 100 years from now, 3-4 generations, it would have clawed back all of that wealth in estate taxes. So ultimately, the state, and while that guy is making money as an entrepreneur, whether you're a Bill Gates or whoever, whenever you sell shares, you're paying taxes, So the state is winning every step of the way. That business, Microsoft, it's paying payroll taxes, it's paying income tax, it's paying all kinds of taxes, So the biggest winner is the state. They get all the value in the end. The question is, because the state exists for the people, is what environment then creates the most prosperity for the most people? And I will argue that it's free market capitalism. Because Bill Gates and other entrepreneurs of his ilk are much, much better allocators of capital than the government.
Not necessarily, because again, this is why it's important for you to read that book. I'll actually share the physical copy.
No,
Because that's the myth that is being based. This thing, even in that government or civil service is no capacity to
no,
be
they can
efficient.
calculate. Well, then they will never be as efficient as the private sector.
Yeah, but
Because the incentives for them to be as efficient as the private sector are not there.
debatable.
Because if just okay, let's if you are running the Ministry of Finance or any important department in government, whether you do a phenomenal job or you do an awful job doesn't actually affect your remuneration. You can be the best minister ever, and in that year, your ministerial wage will be the same as the worst minister ever. So there's no incentive for you to perform. Whereas if you're an entrepreneur and you're the best entrepreneur, you're going to be worth billions.
So your view is the free market, and you're looking at the free market.
You get what you incentivize.
It's probably. I don't want to say I disagree with that or I agree with that, but I think it's bigger than that. I think it's an environment in which anyone can dare and follow their darehood, okay, without much what you call impediments. Okay, that's the environment that facilitates entrepreneurship. Okay,
Yeah.
and you are saying that environment is the free market.
Yes, and the state's job is to create an environment that is most conducive for that market to thrive. It's refereed to make sure that people don't collude and try and corner markets and abuse customers and do things that are illegal. But so yes, you set the rules and you enforce the rules, but you let the market set prices. You let the market decide which products work, which products don't work.
It assumes, and we're taking this argument from when the entire structures are in place. Like right now, we're talking of green, the capital that's required for green energy. You build Kariba. When did you build Kariba?
Oh, yeah, I think in the 1950s or 60s.
UDI, right? That's when you built Kariba. And I don't know how you funded that. How did you fund that?
I don't know, actually. That's an interesting question. Okay. I'm not familiar with the history of the
entrepreneurs that funded that.
I suspect it was the state that did that.
There you go. The lights are on, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, sometimes. In this part of the world, sometimes.
So yeah, we really we talk fluently about the free market.
Yeah, but
the bed has been made.
But what's the counterfactual? You see, so I will argue that if because the state actually controlled utilities, right? The government of Zimbabwe inherited
but
ZESA
over
from
time, this is
the
where
Rhodesians.
then we have to look at history and
Yeah.
see the progression of things. There was a time, once upon a time, during our lifetime, when the communications was a monopoly of PTC. Okay?
Yes.
We crossed that.
Was that great?
That's not the issue here, but we crossed that bridge. There is a time that we live in where, what is the electricity distribution company?
Yeah, ZDEC. I think they split it into 3 or 4 entities.
split
I don't
it
quite understand
Kind
it.
of a monopoly, but you can already see that there are signs of things evolving in the ensuing eras of multiple power energy producers, right? That again, like the telecom sector that was state-owned, okay? Once upon a time, state-owned, but now it's changed. the private sectors, and that
Well,
again
we're still failing. This is still failing, but I can see the intention, to
but
take
you
us.
can see the evolution sometimes, or the finality that we have in analyzing the present and ignoring that there is a trend, there's a history where we're coming from and how things have changed and how things are progressing. And sometimes the analysis of the present, because it's the only thing that we're focusing on in our analysis, the present, it tends to be fatalistic of the present because it's ignoring where we're coming from and where we're trying to go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's an interesting take.
So that's why you will criticize me and say what's the fairy tale?
Oh yeah, that the state is going to solve our problems. I think that's a fairy tale. Do you think the state can solve our problems?
Well, it is.
Is it?
They're nice.
I think in Harare, electricity is a bad example of the state solving our problems. I think healthcare is a bad example of the state
And
solving
again, it's also
our
a
problems.
question of.
I think education. I think I can go on and on.
Yeah, I hear you.
I think So and it's not that this is not just true from a Zimbabwean perspective. It's true everywhere in the world. The incentives are just not there for governments to excel, but the incentives are there for an entrepreneur to excel. Because if you do well, you can buy a bigger house, you have more influence and power, and if you fail, and that's also an equally important incentive. If you fail, you may become destitute. You may lose everything. So you've got a confluence of incentives for you to excel, which exists in the entrepreneurial universe that doesn't exist in governments. So you can have, even if you created some magic filter where only saints would work in government, you'd still not get great outcomes.
Yeah. So what's your thoughts of places like Singapore?
No, but Singapore
State is quite busy there, isn't it?
Yeah, but it's also a fantastic free market capitalist
you set
environment.
up a sovereign wealth fund recently, right? I understand they've got a huge one in Singapore there, and is it Norway and so on.
Yeah.
And the state, and I understand citizens even get a DV from that.
Oh yeah. No, they've done well, but you see, I think that
my point here is the state. Okay, the state being the government, efficiently run, can be. And there's empirical evidence to that effect in our times.
Yes.
That the state can run its affairs so efficiently to the extent that it can pay dividends to households. The evidence is there.
Yes.
But we choose not to look at it. Okay.
No, I concede that point that they ask that Norway and Singapore
celebrate the
I accept that Singapore has done incredibly well, or the Singaporean government and the Norwegian government have done very well. But the wealth that they are harvesting, where did that come from?
Where did it come from?
Because they created an environment that facilitated strong economic growth.
Yes.
And that growth was driven by the private sector. And I'll take my hat off to them in terms of how they've managed to harvest that wealth and deploy it for the benefit of their citizens.
You see, the more we talk, aren't we exaggerating this whole private sector, public sector divide in the first place? Because what is happening there is just a partnership. So the state is an equity shareholder in this entity, right? Right?
By dint of taxes, the state is a shareholder in everything happening in the economy.
Aren't we exaggerating this duality of state and private sector? And could that be the problem that we're facing? That we're saying there is them and us?
No. I don't think that's the case. So we can think about it from in extremes. Okay, right? If the state could do what the private sector does better, it wouldn't need the private sector. It would just do everything that's being done by the private sector better, and the economy would grow faster, right? But the state can't do what the private sector does. So it just creates an environment conducive for the private sector to do well, and then it collects taxes.
Yeah, I mean, it's difficult to have this conversation because our minds we come from the same pot, okay?
Yeah.
Went to the same schools.
Yeah.
So the way we rationalize things with this kind of this Western kind of is entrenched.
But it's not a Western way of looking at the world.
It's entrenched the perception that the state will always be an inefficient producer. It's something that we take as given. But even the few examples that I'm putting out here are in our face to say, chaps, you are wrong. The state can be very efficient.
Yeah, but what is the state in Singapore doing? What is the state in Norway doing? They're running successful sovereign wealth funds, and they are running successful macroeconomic policy. They're not actually players in their economy. Beyond that, for the most part, the economy is run by the competent players who are entrepreneurs and private sector players. Show me an economy where the state is not just doing sovereign wealth fund kind of operations and government operations, but is also farming and manufacturing and running tourism operations and all the things that normally the private sector does, and is doing them well. Where in the world is this happening? Name a nation where that is happening. Where the state is engaged in the market in a big way and it's doing well.
My understanding is that our friend in the East are doing a fantastic job in that.
The Chinese?
Oh, yeah.
No, but they've got entrepreneurs. They've got a massive private sector. And to the extent that they've put their thumb on the scale, like in funding construction, they have a big problem there.
So we're not saying that if I work for Zimbra, okay, if I work for the Minister of Education, or I'm a lecturer or whatever it is, we are not saying I should be an entrepreneur per se. But it's a
mindset.
It's a mindset, yes.
Mm-hmm. Okay. It's an interesting
and we're not saying in those days like Singapore and so on. We're not saying the civil servant at their Zimbra equivalent is running their affairs. No, this is doing whatever the civil servant is doing here in Zim.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, but the way the state is deploying its resources.
I love the Singapore story. I think it's Lee Kong Yu story is very instructive and very inspirational.
You've read the book, I presume.
Yes, I'm a big fan of his memoir. From third world to first world, and I think certainly a lot of us here on the African continent have a lot to learn from the Singapore story. If we adopted just half of his principles and ideas, we would be doing so much better. Anyway, it looks like the producer is jumping up and down. You were concerned about doing an hour, whether you'd survive. See, I told you, it just flies by, and before you know it, the producer is jumping up and down telling us that we need to get off the set. So, thank you so much for joining us. I hope you enjoyed the invaluable contributions from Alfred, who certainly knows what he's talking about, unlike us non-economists. And have a great weekend. Until next time. See? That was